On this channel, I've always talked about creating a rich, vivid experience for your readers. And in today's video, I'm going to show you precisely that. Because I thought to myself that there's no point in me giving you a lot of useful practical writing advice if I don't show you how to implement that in your writing. So today, I'm just going to take a short story that I wrote 6 years ago as a newbie writer, and then I'm going to edit it and transform it into a rich, vivid experience. So we'll be looking at the old version and the new version of the same story, and then discuss about the techniques of description, narration, pacing, showing versus telling, and a lot of other things. So you're in for a treat. Before we start, let me tell you that I will be sharing a very interesting fun fact about the story at the end of this video, so make sure you stick around. Alright, so for the sake of feasibility in this video, I've decided to cut that short story into 4 parts so that we can look at each part, the old version and new version of each part, and then discuss the aspects one by one. All you have to do is to notice the highlighted portions and how they change from the old version to the new version. Of course, I'll be holding your hand and explaining everything, but as I read, that's all you got to do. Look at the highlighted red and the green portions. Okay, so without further ado, presenting my short story, The Gunshot. Part 1, Old Version. The scene buzzed with blaring siren and distressed police officers streaming in and out of the mansion, around which gathered a flock of journalists greedily egging their careers on the high-profile murder case of the city's most affluent businessman. The dead body, yanked on a stretcher with a white sunken red cover, was being shoved into the ambulance. I watched the scene unfold from a distance, hidden perfectly well behind a few bushes. 3 women and a young boy with glistening blue eyes stood in mourning. There was a raspy voice in my head which had wanted this so badly that it never let me rest. "He killed your father, and you shall not rest until you make them weep alike." It always rang in my ears whenever I tried to sleep. My eyes scrutinized them with an ounce of pride until one woman pointed in my direction and bellowed at the top of her voice, "Officer, there he is." The next moment, I was being chased by a bunch of uniformed men, but being a fast runner, I accelerated quickly. "Stop!" the policeman screamed. I leapt forward, taking a sharp turn, and a loud gunshot sent me to the floor. I could hear their footsteps nearing me, and I sucked in a painful groan, covering my mouth with my palms, and desperately wishing that my heart would stop pounding my ribcage, lest they hear it. "Oh, you did the right thing. Don't be afraid now. Think and get yourself out of this mess," the raspy voice encouraged. They had almost reached the turn when I skimmed the roadside and squeezed into an alleyway totally engulfed by darkness. The men were still searching, but it was highly unlikely they would find the narrow alley unless they got a torch. I began limping down this dark street with a bullet seared in my right leg. I was drenched, half each, in blood and sweat, but the wild grin on my visage was priceless. Finally, I had avenged the death of my family. "Congratulations," the raspy voice was freakishly delighted. I reached a crossroad and my legs stopped moving. I sighed and crouched below a windowsill, keeping close to the shadows. "You're a genius," the raspy voice went on, but something else twisted uncomfortably inside me. I felt anxious, and yet again the raspy voice came to my rescue. It was thrilling, wasn't it? I recalled the man pleading for his life, just the way he had made my father cry. I felt a fresh dose of adrenaline overflowing my veins and guffawed a waft of soundless laughter. I stuffed my mouth with huge mounds of air and laughed, holding my stomach. Suddenly, the door beside the window opened and a pair of curious grey eyes gawked at me. "What are you doing there?" the girl asked. I froze, blinking owlishly, fear gripping my soul. Her pupils dilated at my leg. "Come on in," she whispered. Her plump white cheeks were neatly covered with a jet black hijab. I dragged myself towards her while she stepped back to let me in and hurriedly closed the door. "You're foolish," the raspy voice muttered. Okay, so if you noticed the highlighted parts, you would have seen that there is a lot going on here, right? In the beginning paragraph, in the first paragraph of the story, we find, I would say, almost 3 long sentences giving a lot of information to the reader, which is required for the reader to understand the plot, the setting of this short story. However, we feel a bit slowed down by the impact of that. And we also notice that there is a lot of telling, things like the raspy voice was freakishly delighted, the raspy voice encouraged, I was scrutinizing them. We have the use of fancy language in the description. And also, if you noticed, a lot of action is happening in the scene here, right? We see that the woman is pointing and shouting, the policemen are running, our narrator is running. We have so many people doing so many things, and a lot of things happening along with the internal emotion, the internal dialogue, the conflict going on within our character's mind. We have a lot of that, but I want you to now clearly focus on the next version, which is the new version that I'm going to present to you, and then let's talk about what I've changed, why I've changed, and what impact that has made. Part 1, New Version. Sirens blaring set the scene alive. Many police officers streamed in and out of the mansion. A flock of journalists gathered around the gate, greedily egging their careers on the high-profile murder case. One of the city's most affluent businessmen was dead. His body, covered in white with blotches of red, was being shoved into the ambulance. I watched the scene unfold from a distance, hidden behind a few bushes. 3 women and a young boy with glistening blue eyes stood in mourning. A raspy voice in my head had wanted this so badly that it never let me rest. He killed your family, it would say, and you shall not rest until you make them weep alike. It rang in my ears every night and wouldn't let me sleep. So I stood, watching them with pride, until suddenly one woman stepped ahead and bellowed, pointing at me. "Officer, there he is!" The policemen sprinted after me. "Stop!" one of them screamed. I leapt forward, turning sharply around a corner, but a loud gunshot sent me down. I could feel their footsteps nearing me, and I sucked in a painful groan, covering my mouth with my palms and desperately wishing for my heart to stop pounding. "Oh, you did the right thing," said the raspy voice. "Don't be afraid now. Think and get yourself out of this mess." Quickly, I scanned the roadside and squeezed into a dark alley. The men were still searching, but I knew they would never find me without a torch. I began limping down the dark street with a bullet seared in my right leg. I was drenched in blood and sweat, but the wild grin on my face was priceless. Finally, I'd avenged the death of my family. "Congratulations," the raspy voice exclaimed. I stopped at the next crossroad and crouched below a windowsill, keeping close to the shadows. "You're a genius," said the raspy voice, but something twisted uncomfortably inside me. I recalled the man pleading for his life, just like my father. A fresh dose of adrenaline flooded my veins and I laughed, holding my breath. The door beside me flew open and a pair of curious grey eyes looked down at me. "What are you doing there?" the girl asked. I froze. "Come on in," she whispered, eyeing my injured leg. Her plump white cheeks were neatly covered with a black hijab. I dragged myself towards her. She stepped back to let me in and hurriedly closed the door. "You're foolish," said the raspy voice in the back of my head. Okay, so in this version, I think what you can notice immediately in the first paragraph is the breaking of the sentences. In the first version, we have 3 long sentences giving a lot of information, whereas in this second version, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences giving the same information that you need as a reader to understand the plot and the information that you need as you enter the story immediately. But the difference in the second version is that the shorter sentences balanced with the slightly medium length sentences are going to feel more short, crisp, precise, and are going to convey the same information without making the reader feel bogged down with, oops, there's a lot going on here. They don't feel like that. They understand the scene without feeling like, oh, I don't know where to stop. Because you give the reader the variations, like the points exactly where they need to pause and think. It's also very impactful on your pacing because in the first version, you have long sentences and you don't know where to stop as a reader. And you may think that it's going to help the reader with the fast pacing, but actually what it does, it makes your reader read the same thing again and again. Whereas in the newer version, we have 5 shorter or medium length sentences with intentional pauses added there by the writer, aka me, so that you know where to pause and then to continue the scene. You get the information and you don't feel bogged down. Another change you can see is the use of fancy language. I changed this part about my eyes scrutinized them with an ounce of pride. As amazing as that sound, I think that the conveying of the emotion is done much better with the simple language one, which shows, "So I stood watching them with pride until suddenly one woman stepped ahead and bellowed." Also, about the bellowed part, in the first version we have bellowed at the top of her voice, which is well enough, she bellowed at the top of her voice. But in the second version we have she bellowed pointing at me, and that's it. So we have a shorter part, and what we need to notice here is that the word bellowed means that she screamed at the top of her voice. So it already implies, and there is no redundancy in this part. And now let's look at the action part, where they're running at each other. So in the first one we have, "Officer, there he is." And then the next moment I was being chased by a bunch of uniformed men, but being a fast runner, I accelerated quickly. To read that sentence, it takes me a lot of time, but this event of the policeman running after him just takes like a second. It happens in a split second, and so you don't really feel that split second feeling in the first version, whereas in the second version is clear cut, "The policeman sprinted after me." That's it. The shorter it is, the easier it is to convey the emotion behind that action. You can also see the same thing happening where the narrator tries to hide from the policeman. In the first version it is, "They had almost reached the turn when I skimmed the roadside and squeezed into an alleyway, totally engulfed by darkness." So this sentence is a medium length sentence, and it takes longer time to read it than for the narrator to actually quickly look at the situation and hide. So again, you can see in the second version it is shown very clearly. "Quickly, I scanned the roadside and squeezed into a dark alley." I think the entire emotion of him quickly scanning and then squeezing into the alley is more easily conveyed in the second version than in the first version. What do you think? Also notice how I've removed certain fluff parts from the first version. In the first version we have, "I reached a crossroad and my legs stopped moving." Whereas in the second version it's just, "I stopped at the next crossroad." That's it, because that's what just happened. He just stopped at the crossroad. You don't have to be like, "Oh, his legs stopped moving." It may seem fancy, but it's not as effective as the original action. Final sentence before we move ahead to the next part. "I froze, blinking owlishly, fear gripping my soul. Her pupils dilated at my leg." So in this version, we're just trying to say that he is afraid, he froze, and the girl is looking at the legs, and then, her pupils dilated. Fancy language, and we're trying to just explain the emotion to the reader. Whereas in the second version, all I have is, "I froze." That's it. Because "I froze" conveys that exact emotion of fear, and you don't have to tell the fear. It's already conveyed. Alright, let's move on with the story now. Part 2, old version. Her dwelling was a small one, with numerous items cluttered around the place. She pointed to the bed in the center and watched me intently as I limped and winged my way towards it. "You have to carry your burden yourself," she said. I glanced at her, aghast. "My father always says, never help the weak before they really need it, or else they will never discover their true strength." I groaned and lifted my leg over the mattress. Drops of blood trickled down my calf onto the rose-pink bedspread, smearing it with a ghastly crimson stain. "It's okay," she said. "Lie down." I straightened my leg and let my head graze the soft pillow. "This is crazy. Just get out." Raspy voice was impatient. "I'm tired," I snapped at it. "Fool." I ignored the voice and fixated my eyes on her. She pulled out a small chulha, a traditional Indian stove, from under the bed and placed a pot over it. Then she added some water, covered it with the lid, and lit the fire. "What are you doing?" I asked, suppressing a groan. "Tending to your wound." "Do you know how to remove a bullet?" I blurted. She didn't flinch. "The bullet is stuck in the fatty tissues of your calf," she said. "Removing it will do you more harm than good. I will clean your wound on the outside for now and stop the bleeding." "Are you a doctor?" I asked. Sirens were booming outside. She ought to be notably stupid to not decipher the situation, I thought. "No," she shook her head. "My father is one." "Where is your father?" "He's dead." She spoke with a calm that rattled my insides. I had never talked about my family with such ease after they were gone. She got up and brought a towel from the cupboard. Then she dipped it into the water and gently began cleaning my wound. "I'm sorry," I began, "about your father. You spoke of him in the present tense, so—" "He still exists," she said. "The values we learn from people stay alive in our deeds, even after they are dead." "She's a crackhead," raspy voice shrieked inside my mind. So in this version, I hope you noticed that I was trying to draw your attention towards the description of the space, the description of the action happening, and the description of the expression of these characters. To be honest, none of it feels cluttered or bad, I think it's still really good writing. However, I just want to show you the slight tweaks that I made in the newer version. I actually changed very little of this specific part in the newer version, so I'm just going to draw your attention towards those specific changes in the newer version so you can see how the smallest of changes can make the most significant impacts. Her dwelling was a small one. Everything was cluttered yet strangely organized. So look at that sentence right there. What the description was doing in the first version, in the old version it was, her dwelling was a small one with numerous items cluttered around the place. And then that's that. It just gives you the idea, okay, it's a small place with a bunch of items cluttered. But the second version gives you a description which makes the reader think and which conveys certain emotions about the character to the reader. For example, everything was cluttered yet strangely organized. That strangeness, the strangeness of everything feeling like organized, is actually the emotion of our narrator trying to comprehend the space of this new girl that he's just met. And it speaks a lot about a narrator because we are listening, we are watching this scene from inside our narrator, the protagonist, right? And it probably also speaks some volume about the new character that has just entered the story. So I like how the description in the second version adds that subtle, flavorful mystery. Moving on. "You have to carry your burden yourself," she said. I scowled at her. Compare this with the old version, where it is, "You have to carry your burden yourself," she said. I glanced at her, aghast. So that first sentence, "I glanced at her aghast," still evokes the feeling, it gives the expression, it conveys the emotion, it does it well. But in the second version, I just changed it with one word, which is scowled. I scowled at her because I think that one word pinpoints the exact expression that I'm wanting to evoke on the narrator's face. Now, this advice is not to be confused with what I said before about using fancy language. For some of you, the adjective scowled may seem like fancy language. However, there's no restriction in using a certain word if it exactly pinpoints what you're trying to tell. The problem arises when you try to use fancy language where something a lot simpler could have easily done a greater, better job. Okay, look at this next sentence. From our old version, it was, "Drops of blood trickled down my calf onto the rose-pink bedspread, smearing it with a ghastly crimson stain." That's very, very descriptive. True that. But in our second version, I just shortened it and I just made it this one simple sentence, which is, "Blood smeared across the white bedspread." This is, I think, totally a matter of opinion. So you tell me which of these two descriptions do you like. The first one is definitely more descriptive. It gives you, I would say, more immersive feeling. But the second one does the impactful job. It gives you that one solid blow. That blood, white bedspread, and a stain. That's it. It gives you the feeling and you move on in the story. It increases the pacing, but also gives you the same emotion. That's how I feel about this. Writing is a form of art, and I would say that everything is a matter of opinion when it comes to descriptions and certain things. I'm just sharing what I think is going to help you. So if you like the first description, by all means keep it. I just think that the second one does the job better here. Let's look at the description of action in the old version first. I straightened my leg and let my head graze the soft pillow. So that's again quite descriptive of the action, the action exactly what our narrator is doing, that he is reluctant, he straightened his leg and let his head graze the pillow, the exact action. Whereas the newer version has, "It's okay," she said, "lie down." I obeyed reluctantly. That's it. Because I don't think we need to know exactly the motion of his limbs the way he lay down. So in my opinion, the clear winner is the second one. Also, this part I think has something with character development too, because let's look at this specific dialogue. "Where is your father?" "He's dead." That's what we have in the first version. In the newer version, I changed that to be, "Where is your father? He died 2 years ago." The reason I made this change is because "he's dead" seems more, although it's calm, but it seems slightly emotionless. Do you think a girl who really values her father so much would just say that he's dead? It just doesn't fit with her character. Whereas I think in the second version, "He died 2 years ago," her tone and the fact that she mentions that she remembers the time frame, I just changed that dialogue just to give more flavor to her character. This is again something you can do. I know it's not related to description or pacing or narration, but still, because I made the change, I thought I'd let you know. Also, look at the 2 sentences I deleted from the old version. I deleted, "The sirens were booming outside. She ought to be notably stupid to not decipher the situation, I thought." I think you're writing for a clever reader. You don't need to mention that. The reader can already gauge that information, and I feel that it was interrupting the dialogue, so I just removed it from the second version. It's just not there. Moving on, let's do part 3, old version. "She continued nursing my leg. Minutes passed, and I could hear the distant sound of the sirens. My father was killed," she said, out of nowhere, and the hollow pit in my abdomen expanded to various parts of my shivering body. "Ever thought of revenging his death?" I found myself asking, shrugging the raspy voice off. "Revenge?" She looked at me with an ironically funny expression. "You see that pot of water?" she said, as my eyes diverted to it. "I heated the water for a few minutes and provided you with the warmth you required. But if I hadn't taken the lid off, it would have blasted, burning you instead." I stared back at her with an incorrigible expression. Raspy voice gurgled. "That pot is you. Your anger fuels the fire, and revenge is nothing but the lid of the pot." I gaped at her serene face while she carefully bandaged my wound. I could feel hot tears clouding my view, and astonishingly enough, my leg did not prick me anymore. My conscience did. Like a bar of magnet, the raspy voice pulled me out. "You did the right thing," it said, and I stretched my mouth into a wide, spooky smile. Anybody would have declared me mental. She, however, seemed utterly oblivious of my state. She had already put away the pot and stove, had cleaned up the mess, and was spreading a mattress for herself on the floor. "You should sleep now." I muttered. "You don't know what I've done." "You don't have to tell her, you idiot," the raspy voice rebuked. "Yes, I know," she replied. "Wasn't that tough to guess?" "Then why did you help me?" "I didn't tell you about the water in the pot, did I?" She smiled. "Those are emotions." With that, she pulled the blanket up till her chin and closed her eyes shut. I turned over my side, ignoring the pain, and closed my eyes, tears trickling down my shabby beard. Her words echoed through my cerebellum as the raspy voice shrunk into a globule of nothingness. After what seemed like ages, I sighed and turned towards her. Her smooth, elegant features contained a peaceful aura, and her eyes closed in the soothing stupor I had been yearning all my life. Okay, so this scene is the most important scene of my story because this is where my protagonist has the aha moment. He has an epiphany. My favorite word when it comes to short stories is epiphany, which means that he has a realization, that he finally understands what he has not been able to understand for all these years of his life. So this is the moment where things come together in his mind. So he actually understands his conflict and he overcomes that conflict. Therefore, what I wanted you to notice in this specific scene, and what I'm going to talk about more, is one of my past writing advice in my videos is about writing stories that are complex but not complicating it. So this scene is an example of that. I feel that in an attempt to convey some complex emotions of revenge and forgiving people, and the entire theme, I feel it's kind of complex. It's a lot of complex emotions. She is talking to a murderer, for the love of God. She's talking to a murderer here, and it's quite serious. The things happening in the scene are quite serious. And I feel that these complex emotions, when I was trying to write that scene 6 years ago, I was making it more complicated with the language, with the narration. And narration is exactly what I want you to focus upon as I read the newer edited version of the same scene. She continued nursing my leg. Minutes passed and the sounds of the sirens grew distant. My father was killed, she said out of nowhere. The hollow pit in my stomach expanded to fill my shivering body. Ever thought of revenging his death? I asked. No. Why? You see that pot of water? She said, and I looked at it. I heated the water for a few minutes and provided you with the warmth you required, but if I hadn't taken the lid off, it would have blasted, burning you instead. I stared back at her, confused. That pot is you. Your anger fuels the fire, and the revenge is nothing but the lid of the pot. I gaped at her, awestruck, hot tears clouding my view. My leg did not bother me anymore. My conscience did. You did the right thing, said the raspy voice, and I stretched my mouth into a wide, spooky smile. She cleaned up the mess, spread a mattress on the floor, and lay down on it. You should sleep now, she said. I muttered. You don't know what I've done. You don't have to tell her, you idiot, the raspy voice rebuked. Yes, I know, she replied. Then why did you help me? I didn't tell you about the water boiling in the pot, did I? She smiled. Those are emotions. Without another word, she pulled the blanket to her chin and closed her eyes. I turned over my side, ignoring the pain and shutting my eyes. Tears trickled down my shabby beard. Her words echoed in my head and the raspy voice shrunk into nothing. After what seemed like ages, I sighed and turned towards her. Her tired face slept oblivious to all pain in the world, and her eyes held within them the peaceful sleep I had been yearning for all my life. So I hope you noticed that I actually removed a lot of things from the first version. From the old version, there are things like I could hear. I removed the part about hearing because we don't want the reader to come out of the scene. We want the reader to stay inside. So things like I could hear, I could see, I could feel, all of those things, all of those words, the verbs, we don't need them. We only need to be in the scene. So instead of I could hear the distant sounds of the sirens, I made it the sounds of the sirens grew distant. It makes a huge impact. The next was the hollow pit in my abdomen expanded to various parts of my shivering body. I felt that this phrase, although did justice to the feeling, but somehow created a complexity, and I didn't want the complexity. I wanted the words to be simple, conveying the complex emotions. So I changed that to be my stomach. Replacing abdomen with stomach makes a huge difference. You will only realize it when you're reading the entire story in flow, and that's when if that had been abdomen, it makes you stop and for a minute wonder, wait, which part is the abdomen? Whereas stomach is a more layman language, and that lets you flow. So the hollow pit in my stomach expanded to fill my shivering body is just enough to give me that context. Another thing that I deleted is the part here. Ever thought of revenging his death? I found myself asking, shrugging the raspy voice off. I actually didn't need that entire dialogue tag over there. You don't need it at all, because sometimes you only want the dialogue to do the job of conveying what you're trying to tell and not the dialogue tag. You don't need to explain it. The over-explaining, we don't need it here. So I removed that, and the dialogue just became this, from the entire part, revenge. She looked at me with an ironically funny expression. That sentence would make any reader stop and think, wait, what is an ironically funny expression? You don't want that. You don't want your reader to stop and think about these things. You want your reader to reach the epiphany. So instead of that, I just made it, ever thought of revenging his death? I asked. No. Why? Clear cut, we have, she says no, and that's a full sentence. And that makes sense. She never thought of it. And he simply asks why, and then that's it. You don't need the narration to do the job of providing the context to your reader, because your reader is a clever reader. Another favorite sentence I have here is, in my old version, it's, I stared back at her with an incorrigible expression. Raspy voice gurgled. My intention with that sentence was to show the internal conflict. I wanted the reader to feel the internal conflict of my character in this one sentence. But instead of that, in my newer version, I just made it, I stared back at her, confused. That's it, because I think he is just confused in that moment, you know. We already know the internal conflict by this point. So my character just being confused makes complete sense. I don't have to bring in the raspy voice at every instant. The raspy voice is going to come in and be in the background, and it doesn't need to be in every sentence of your narration. Basically, the raspy voice in this story represents the internal conflict. So I'm just trying to tell you that the internal conflict does not need to be in every sentence. You don't have to describe that in every narrative paragraph. It just needs to be somewhere in the background. Another big change is in this paragraph. My old version says, like a bar of magnet, the raspy voice pulled me out. You did the right thing, it said, and I stretched my mouth into a wide, spooky smile. Anybody would have declared me mental. She, however, seemed utterly oblivious of my state. She'd already put away the pot and stove, had cleaned up the mess, and was spreading mattress for herself on the floor. That entire part, I think it's quite self-explanatory if she just ignores him, and that's what I did in my newer version, which is, you did the right thing, said the raspy voice, and I stretched my mouth into a wide, spooky smile. She cleaned up the mess, spread a mattress on the floor, and lay down on it. That's it. I think that one sentence of description of her action, of the girl's action in this part, conveys a lot about the girl. You don't have to be explaining to the reader that, hey, this girl is not bothered by his spooky smile. She's ignoring him. You don't have to explain all of those parts, because just the fact that she cleaned up the mess, spread a mattress on the floor, and lay down, that information explains everything, implies that she is not bothered by him at all. So I would say sometimes, most times, less is more. And like you can see, again, talking about the fancy language, in my old version it says, her words echoed through my cerebellum as the raspy voice shrunk into a globule of nothingness. I actually loved that sentence when I first wrote it. I was like, wow, I'm such a great writer, because I wrote something about cerebellum, which just means your brain, by the way, and shrunk into the globule of nothingness. I just thought, wow, I'm a brilliant writer. I'm gonna be like the next billionaire writer that exists. But the reality is that once I wrote this new version 6 years later, this part, which simply says, her words echoed in my head, and the raspy voice shrunk into nothing. I know it's simple. I know it's not as fancy as the older version. And if you like the fancy version, go ahead with it. Again, it's a matter of opinion. But I think that in my newer version, her words echoed in my head. It's way easier for the reader to grasp and to really feel the emotion that I'm trying to showcase in that one sentence there. And finally, let's look at the most important sentence of the scene, which is the aha moment. Let's look at the old version of that sentence, which is, her smooth, elegant features contained a peaceful aura, and her eyes closed in the soothing stupor I had been yearning for all my life. In all honesty, I have no problem with that sentence, and I probably wouldn't have changed it. I only changed it in the newer version because I wanted to play around with the words and see if I could come up with something even better. I'm not sure if the newer version is better, but I'm pretty sure it's almost equivalent to the previous one. I would like your opinions. The newer version says, her tired face slept oblivious to all pain in the world, and her eyes held within them the peaceful sleep I had been yearning for all my life. I told you. As I said, this sentence is, again, I feel that the old version and the new version, in terms of this specific sentence, are giving away the same feeling, the same emotion. But I was just, in the mood of playing around and coming up with a new aha moment sentence for my protagonist, so I wrote that. Tell me in the comments below, which of these two sentences did you like? Okay, let's move to part 4 of the story, which is the climax. The alley was cold, but a powerful, balmy layer blanketed my insides. I dragged my leg, the pain receding a little. The mansion was faintly visible now among the crowd that had not dispersed yet, and the 2 armed men stood at the gate. The woman appeared distraught, wailing in a deafening chorus, while a neighbor was ushering them inside. Only the young boy with the blue eyes stood in the very same position. Slowly, he lifted his deadpan gaze off the ground and met my pensive, guilty one. I staggered ahead with my hand outstretched. I was almost there, right at their porch, to beg for selfish forgiveness. But the next second spiraled quickly. Within a flash, I saw the boy pounce on the armed man, snatching his oversized weapon. A gut-wrenching scream tore through my lungs, followed by an excruciating surge of pain in my chest. I heard the raspy voice again, distant and loud, already far inside his system. In that moment, I fell again, this time at the familiar sight of the young boy holding a gun with slender, trembling hands. Okay, can I just boast a little bit and say that I just loved the climax of this story? I mean, I'm just gonna say it outright. I loved the climax of my own story that I wrote 6 years ago. I honestly, I didn't want to even change it because I think it just does the job quite perfectly. But there were only few instances where I decided that, this can be even better than what it is. This can even be more impactful with less effort. And that's why I came up with the newer version. Let's read that first before I give you my specifics. The alley was cold and the wind was merciless. I dragged my leg, the pain receding with every step towards the mansion. The crowd had not dispersed. 2 armed men stood on either side of the gate. The women were wailing in a deafening chorus, a neighbor trying to usher them inside. Only the young boy with blue eyes stood in the very same position. Slowly, he lifted his gaze off the ground and met my guilty one. I staggered ahead with my hand outstretched. I was almost there, right at their porch. Then, everything spiraled quickly. The boy pounced on the armed man, snatching his weapon and aiming at me. I screamed, a surge of pain shooting up my chest. I heard the raspy voice again, distinct and loud, this time from inside the young boy. In that moment, I fell again, this time at the familiar sight of the young boy holding a gun with slender, trembling hands. Okay, so this newer version is my ultimate favorite climax, and I think you can guess why, because it does a lot more than what the older version of the same climax did. And I think it's also my favorite for this video because I'll be able to show you description, pacing, narration, all 3 of them in just this short excerpt of the climax. So let me walk you through the specifics and let's discuss. First thing I did is that I substituted the sentence from the old version, but a powerful, balmy layer blanketed my insides. I substituted that with the wind was merciless. This one sentence actually showcases to you that your description needs to do a lot more than just giving the visual idea to your reader. It can also be playing beneath. Your description can also be foreshadowing a lot of things like it does in the newer version. The wind being merciless is representative of the fact that you will not always receive forgiveness of that entire theme. I know it seems kind of like an English class where I'm trying to explain my writing to you, but I'm just trying to help you understand how description can be doing a lot of other things than just giving your reader a visual clue. Even the next sentence, which is, I dragged my leg, the pain receding with every step towards the mansion. With every step towards the mansion, that part showcases the feeling of your protagonist. So again, your narration, it's not description, but this is narration. When the protagonist specifically mentions that the metaphorical pain in his head was decreasing because he was reaching out to ask for forgiveness. So as you have seen that I have used a description to do foreshadowing just before that, and then I used the narration to showcase the feeling that the protagonist is going through. And the next thing I want to show you is the part with pacing, and I think the next 2 paragraphs does that well. So the first change that I made is over here. The crowd had not dispersed. 2 armed men stood on either side of the gate. The women were wailing in a deafening chorus, a neighbor trying to usher them inside. So over there, I would say I'm trying to build that pacing towards the final moment of the story. Because they are, again, shorter sentences instead of the old version's long sentences. The old version has, the mansion was faintly visible now amongst the crowd that had not dispersed. It's long. It's quite long, the first version. Whereas the second version has 3 short sentences, which gives you the idea and which leads you towards the final moment, which again is the perfect combination, I would say, of narration, pacing, and description. Let me read that part again, which is, in the new version, then everything spiraled quickly. The boy pounced on the armed man, snatching his weapon and aiming at me. If you compare this sentence with the old version, which says something like, I was almost there right at the porch to beg for selfish forgiveness, but the next second spiraled quickly. Within a flash, I saw the boy pounce on the armed man, snatching his oversized weapon. I feel that the old version, although it does the job of conveying the action, it somehow reduces the impact because it's trying to give too many details. In the old version, notice this. The next second, within a flash, I saw these phrases, especially the phrase, snatching his oversized weapon. The word oversized over there makes your reader stop and think, wait, is it oversized from the protagonist perspective, or is it oversized for the young boy who is snatching the weapon? So it makes you stop, and I don't want that. So I just deleted that little detail, and I made it into this crisp sentence which just says that the boy pounced on the armed man, snatching his weapon and aiming at me. So it shows you the action with quite less words and a lot more impact. And the final change I made, which you can compare from the old version says, a gut-wrenching scream tore through my lungs, followed by an excruciating surge of pain in my chest. This is just, again, the concept of me trying to use fancy language and then thinking that the fancy language is going to enhance and elevate the quality of my work. Whereas in the newer version, if you see, all I did was to convey clearly what I was trying to say. The new version says, I screamed, a surge of pain shooting up my chest. That's it. Within that sentence, we know that this person has been hit with the bullet, and then there is a pain shooting up through the chest, and then that's it. And we move on to the theme, which is, I heard the raspy voice again. Notice how I use I heard in the newer version here. The reason I'm making an exception for the newer version over here is only because here, in this story, in this part of the story, it makes sense. Because in our previously, our protagonist had, shrunk the raspy voice inside his own mind into nothing. We talked about that. But now here, the protagonist is sort of listening, hearing the raspy voice again, and for a moment your reader thinks maybe it's the raspy voice inside his head, but then it's clarified that the raspy voice is this time not in your protagonist's head, but in the young boy who is holding the gun with slender, trembling hands. So that's why using the phrase I heard makes complete sense for this specific instance. Alright, that exactly is my way of transforming my stories into experiences for my readers. Let me know if you enjoyed this video in the comment section, and if you would like to see more such videos where I'm sharing my own work and explaining to you how I came up with those things. In fact, if you want to know how I came up with the idea, the theme, the creation, character building, and all of that for this specific story, let me know in the comments because I would love to share that. Also, now for the fun fact that I promised to tell you about this story in the beginning of the video, which is this. Let me tell you that this story, wait a minute, the older version of this story was actually a winner of the long story short competition held by Notions Press Publishing and was eventually published in the long story short book. It's actually an anthology. You can purchase it on Amazon. I'll try to link it down in the description, but I don't think you need it because you've already just read the entire story in this video. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you, with mentioning this incident, I wanted to give you the moral that you don't always need the best versions of your stories in order to get published. I know this is turning into a separate writing advice, but let's just say that this is a pro tip from this video that I want to share with you, that my new edited version came after 6 years of me writing it. This book got published in 2020, so actually at that point I didn't even edit it. I just edited it right now, like 3 days ago, for this specific video. And that's why I'm trying to share with you that your best, your best writer self is going to change every single year as you grow as a writer. Back then when I wrote the older version, that was the best that I could do as a writer, and that's why it got published, And today, maybe if I send the second one somewhere, maybe it'll get published, maybe it won't. So never associate your self-worth of writing with publishing and things like that. That's all I want to say. Okay, this is me, Srishti Rathour, signing off for this video. This was so fun to create. Thank you so much for watching. I had a lot of fun, and I will see you next in maybe this video next, which you can watch after this one. Bye!